the SaWGuY podcast.
Like scary movies. What's your favorite scary movie?
Here's Johnny.
We'll tear your soul apart.
The boogeyman is real, and you found him.
Game over, man. Game over.
What do you want?
I want to hear you scream. Drop the prime time, bitch.
Come on, you miserable fathead. Get that fat ass truck out of my way.
Welcome to the SaWGuY podcast. As always, y'all know I am the SaWGuy, and I'm bringing you episode 37 on Duel. Well, I know everyone's going to be asking, what is Duel? What film are you talking about? What? That's right, I am talking about Steven Spielberg, not Stephen King. Steven Spielberg's first film was a horror film, and believe it or not, it was actually a really damn good horror film that inspired him and got him his foot in the door so he could do Jaws. And, you know, it's so funny to me that people forget about this film because this was the first, I guess you could say, truck driver horror film. You know, there was a lot of other copycats that recently came out, you know, in the last, 15 years. You had Joyride and all those other sequels. Maximum Overdrive in the 80s, but, you know, you wouldn't have any of those films without this film, Duel. And I'm going to break it down for you like I always do, and give you a little bit of tidbits, because there's some interesting facts on this film that just blew my mind away. I was like, what the fuck, are you serious? So, the Duel. When Steven Spielberg first started out in this, you know, he was only 24 years old when he did this film, and he shot this film between 12 and 16 days. And a lot of the process was because of the editing process and everything, and he was on crunch time because this film was given the green light. And in the 70s, this is actually 1971, ABC, the channel, they would do, movie of the week. That's what they called it, right? So this movie of the week was Duel, right? Steven Spielberg, he got this idea from the film because this story, it was actually a story written, and I'm laughing at this because back in the day, they used to do this a lot. You know, for entertainment purposes, they didn't have as many movies as you see now come out. So what they did, you had a lot of people who were writers, you know, people who wrote stuff in Hollywood. They would write, short novels and stuff, and they would put it, get it published in certain magazines. Well, the story of Duel was written by Richard Matheson, and some of you guys are probably thinking, I recognize that name from somewhere. Well, Richard Matheson, he was a great writer in its own self. He wrote the original episodes of The Twilight Zone, right? He wrote, I think it was Eye of the Beholder, or Beauty of the Eye of the Beholder, or one of those episodes, but it was one of the most well-known episodes, and that, made him huge already as it is. He wrote for Night Gallery, and that's where they kind of, talked about little things, and they met up. But anyways, he wrote this story, Duel, and he got it published, of all places, in the magazine of Playboy, and I believe it was 1969, the end of 1969, and Steven Spielberg's assistant was reading through it and says, oh, you gotta read this is good, because Spielberg at the time, he was doing TV, and he did an episode of Kojak, and he did, 2 episodes of Night Gallery, and for him, he just did, like, a lot of weird things differently. Like, he didn't shoot a TV show, like, with a camera where it's, like, zoomed in and shit. He did, like, big, wide shots, because he was practicing to do movies. And anyways, he got this idea to see if he can get a movie made out of this story. And it was a short story, so it's probably like one full page on one side of a magazine. But, I mean, he had to use a lot of fluff to bring it up, but Spielberg, man, he was a fucking genius on this, right? So anyways, the whole story of Duel, how that all came about was, I think it was Universal or somebody, they had bought the picture rights to it. And then, Spielberg, he decided, okay, I can do this film, and it's a good story. So I'm going to get into the story now and tell you what it's all about. Because it's one of the best films, I think, before you had, gore and all that other shit kind of mixed in with horror films. You got to remember, this is 1971. So this was before Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974. This was before The Town That Dreaded Sundown in 1976. This was old school horror, Hitchcock style. But anyways, the whole story, what it's about, it basically follows this businessman. And his name is David Mann, and it's played by, what's his name? Fuck, I'm trying to remember his name. I wrote all my notes down. Dennis Weaver. And Dennis Weaver, he had just finished up doing his TV show. And Dennis Weaver, for all of you that don't know who he He's an old-time actor, and he did like a lot of cowboy roles. He did like 1 or 2 black and white horror films, back in his day, but he was towards the twilight of his career, I guess you could say. And Spielberg wanted him to play this character, and I'll tell you all in a minute. But basically what David Mann's character was, he was a salesman in the 70s. So, he wakes up, have his coffee, do the normal shit, gets in his car, starts it up, listen to the AM radio, because you didn't have FM radio back in the day. And what I loved about it is that there's these wide shots of his car. He was driving a 1970, they used 3 different cars. They used a 1970, 1971, and 1972 Plymouth Valiant. And they basically show a wide shot where his car backs out, he goes on the road, then he gets on the freeway. And what's funny is that, as old as this film is, all that shit is still up, Not the house where he originally pulled out from, but when he was driving around like the old school LA freeways, they're still up. And I was just like, holy shit, this is pretty interesting. So he's taking a route, and he's going out towards the desert side of Southern California, because he's going to meet up with a guy who he doesn't want to lose the account for, right? So they basically said he's a businessman. He's just driving, and I should mention, too, that this film has little dialogue to none around that range, because it doesn't show, there's only one character that it follows, but it shows other characters later on in the film. So he's driving, right? And he comes up right behind this truck. This truck's driving slow. And, he's getting irritated. Like, come on. I got places to go, And, he's just, and I'm going to say it like this. I don't have road rage. But I know we've all driven on the freeway, and we come up, and there's, what do you see? You see 2 or 3 trucks in the lane. Well, back in the day, they only had 2 lanes, right? So if you got stuck behind a truck, either you follow that truck, or you have to go around it and pass it up. So what does he do? He goes right behind the truck, and then he passes it up. Thinks nothing of it, and then he goes back down to normal cruising speed. And all of a sudden, he hears like this diesel truck. It passes him up, gets right behind, not right behind him, but right in front of him, and starts to brake check him. Starts to drive really slow on purpose. Kind of fucks with him a little bit, And then as he's trying to go around, the truck was not letting him pass. Like, he kept speeding up, and then he kept kind of doing wide turns left and right, Finally, David Mann, he got tired of this shit, and he said, all right, pass him up. And he's just laughing at himself, like, I passed you up, what are you going to do? And the truck, is honking, all pissed off. And so, after that, he goes and stops at this gas station. And I laugh at this, too, because back in the day, gas stations, they weren't self-serve. So he pulls up, and, you see the gas attendant and everything. And he's like, oh, what'll it be? And he's like, oh, fill it up with ethanol, Another old-time thing, they filled cars back in the day with ethanol. And, he's telling the guy, okay, well, you can check out the car, do what you got to do, because there was a full-on attendant thing, right? So he pops the hood, checks it, and says, oh, your radiator hose are messed up. You want to fix that? I'll be fine. And he gets out of the car, and as soon as he's getting out of the car talking to the attendant, guess who pulls up? The fucking truck driver! This is what I thought was pretty interesting. So the truck driver comes out, he's honking for the other gas attendant, and the gas attendant's like, all right, I'll be with you. All right, calm down, hold on. So David Mann, he goes inside this gas station, and it was pretty weird, because they had like what do you call it? Like a washer and dryer set up and shit. And so he goes to a payphone, puts a coin in. He starts talking to his wife, telling her, yeah, I'll be home in time. And you kind of, develop the sense of how and who he was. He was one of those guys that was just like under the radar kind of thing, because it showed that, it showed his home life. It showed that his wife was home with his 2 boys. And, he's talking to his wife about everything. And, he was calling up to tell her, hey, I'm sorry about the fight we had last night. And his wife was like, well, we didn't have to fight if you didn't tell that guy, like, hey, why are you trying to rape me in front of everybody? And he's one of those mellow out guys that's, I guess you could say, it reminds me kind of like George McFly from Back to the Future, which I think his character was inspiration towards Back to the Future, because Steven Spielberg also did that film as well, right? So he's on the phone with his wife, whatever, they have a little quick spat argument, hangs up, and as he's getting to this car, he sees a truck driver come out. And so he's like, all right, whatever. He sees the guy. But the best part is, throughout this whole film, spoiler alert, you don't see who the truck driver is. You see the truck driver come out, and it shows like these still shots. And it's zooming in on his feet, right? And it's zooming in on his feet because he's wearing cowboy boots. And he's kicking his tires, checking everything, right? Then all of a sudden, David Mann gets in his car and says, all right, here you go. Pulls off, right? Drives on like it's merry old day. And then all of a sudden, this truck driver starts coming up again, super fast. And then it has the dialogue of, I was going to say Dennis Weaver. That's the name of the actor. It has the dialogue of David Mann, who's like, what the hell? That truck is right behind me again? And the truck passes him, right? So he's getting irritated because he's like, all right, well, I'm never going to make this fucking account now. So he basically, tries to go around. Then that's when the truck gets a little aggressive. And the truck starts, veering off into the other lane, veering to the other lane. Then finally, the car, well, David, he starts to slow down. And then all of a sudden the truck pulls out his arm. And then he's just like telling him, go ahead, pass up, right? He tells him that. And as he's driving, he goes in the other lane. Another fucking car comes. And then he veers right out so he doesn't have a car accident. And he starts to think, wow, this guy's trying to kill me or what the fuck, So, we've all had those moments before where you're driving behind a truck driver and they end up being an asshole with you. But, the moral of the story that I got out of this film was don't fuck with truck drivers. I've heard some stories from my mom's side of the family. Some of them were truck drivers. Man, they would tell you some crazy shit back in the day, man. But anyways, back to the movie. So, he finally gets around him, passes him up, punches it. And then, as he's, passes him up and everything, he's like, all right, whatever. He's not going to fuck with me. He can't catch up. But he thought wrong. That's when this souped up diesel just starts, hitting in, I guess, the 4th or 5th gear. Because it shows, you can hear the gears grinding. And he starts punching it. And he literally gets right behind his ass, And they're going down the freeway like, 80, 90 miles an hour. And I thought it was funny because David Mann, he has, the Plymouth Valiant. And for those of you who don't know what a Plymouth Valiant is, it's basically a Dodge Dart with a Plymouth badge on it. It was an old-time car. It was like a family car. It wasn't meant to go up fast. And, back in the day, they made cars like a fucking house, They were built, like, with solid steel. So you could tell he's punching it, and it shows, like, the needle on the gauge, like, go from 60 and struggling to get up to 70. And as he's doing that, this, truck is just rearing his ass. But it's doing no damage, because these cars were made hella good back in the day. Finally, he sees the sign for a diner. And he's like, oh shit, I gotta get out of the way. So it shows all the dialogue in his head. And basically, as he comes up to the diner, he starts to lose control. And you gotta remember, they didn't have ABS brakes. So when you step on the brakes, you're gonna slide all over, right? What does he do? He steps on the brakes, slides all over, hits a fence, and, everyone comes out, hey, you okay? Oh, I'm fine. Just my neck. Oh. It's just, I love Dennis Weaver because he's one of those actors who can do, like, the dramatic phase, like, times 10. And he was a perfect actor for this role, because everything that he did, he built up such anxiety. And it was, the way that he built up his anxiety was a wink to what Alfred Hitchcock used to do in his films, like with Psycho and everything, That's what I think a lot of it came from, was the driving scene and him kind of talking to himself. And I think that was all based off of, the inspiration of Hitchcock from Spielberg, what he got out of it, right? So after he crashes, he just fucking leaves his car there, leaves the door open, just walks into the diner, and everyone's asking him, hey, you okay? You okay? Yeah. Where's your bathroom? And so basically, the whole scene follows him from walking in, talk to a few people, and they're all like, down the hall, to the left, make a right, down that hall, to the left, to the right, no, wrong way, left way. I don't know why the fuck they added that scene in there. So it follows him to the bathroom. He washes his face, and he's basically, unwinding after everything, and he's like, oh, good, okay, well, I woke up this morning, and you didn't know that things could change your life, but in 25 minutes, that was the craziest shit. At least I don't have to deal with that guy again, right? He goes back out to this diner, and as he, they tell him, oh, do you want to sit down and eat? He's like, yeah. He goes and sits down at the seat by the window, and who's outside the fucking window? The truck driver. Because you got to remember, once he veered off the road, the truck driver kept going, but then he did a U-turn. You don't see that. That's the mystery behind it. And then it shows that he's, parked on the side, and they never showed who he was, which I thought was really interesting. So he's sitting there, and he's like, holy shit, this truck driver's parked outside, and it shows all these people, and it shows a zoom in of their boots, and it's building up the suspense, right? Like, could it be one of these guys? It has to be one of these guys. I know it's one of these guys. And he's thinking to himself, right? Then that's when the diner lady comes in and says, hey, what will it be? And he's like, well, I'll have some aspirin for my head and let me get a rye and Swiss cheese sandwich on rye bread, rye, R-Y-E, rye bread. And I laugh because, you know, I'm a fan of rye bread, so I just laugh at that shit, the way how he says it. Then he has to spell it out. Let me know in the comments below if that shit made you laugh, because I was dying after I saw that scene. I was like, here you are, you know, almost get ran over and you're complaining about what type of bread for your sandwich, right? Go figure. But anyways, he doesn't even eat the fucking sandwich. You know, the whole time he gets a sandwich and everything, and he's just staring at all these guys. He's staring at their boots. And then he's playing it out in his head like, okay, well, if I go and talk to these guys, what are they going to do, you know? And he basically played it out that if he went to talk to this guy, what would he do? He turns around and looks at him. He plays it out in his head, well, what if I talk to this guy? And he's, you know, smoking a cigarette, and then all of a sudden he just blows smoke in his face. He's like, all right. And then he sees this other guy sitting across from him. He's eating a sandwich and staring out. And he thinks it's this guy, based on his boots, right? So, doesn't finish the sandwich. He goes up to the guy and he goes, hey, quit it. You know, I'm done with this shit, you know? And he's telling the guy, I know what you're doing. Please knock it off. And then the guy's like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know, he's just sitting there eating his sandwich. And then all of a sudden, he gets mad, slaps his sandwich out. They have a little scuffle, and the guy beats the shit out of him. And then, you know, the diner owner comes out to cook, and he's like, hey, you better leave. And the other guy's like, well, why the hell are you messing with him? He's like, well, he slapped the damn sandwich out of my hand. I'll buy you that and another beer. You know, I get a kick out of this because, I mean, it's early horror films, before the heyday of horror films, you know, and before all the major players start coming in. I laugh at it because, I mean, there's a lot of, I would say, dark humor into it, which, you know, I'm obviously a fan of, right? So after all that whole shit goes down, then all of a sudden, you know, he's regaining himself, and then he sees this truck. It starts up, and then all of a sudden it starts to take off. So as he gets out of the diner, he starts running physically to try and chase after this truck driver because he wants to see what he looks like, right? And this whole movie follows that aspect of you're trying to figure out who he looks like, who he is, but you don't find out, right? So after he sees the truck driver take off, he's like, all right, fuck this. He walks back to his car. The car door is still open. He gets in his car, you know, starts it up, and then takes off as the fence is all fucking turned over. He gets on the road. And as he's on the road, you know, he comes up, and there's a school bus that's broken down with all these kids messing around and playing. And the bus driver flags him down. He's like, hey, you know, the school bus broke down. Can you help us give us a push? And the guy's like, well, I don't know. You know, I mean, that's a fucking school bus, and you want me to push into the Plymouth Valiant. You know, and the guy assumed that he said yes. So he got all of the screaming kids into the school bus and everything. He gets behind the bus, and then he starts his car. And then he tries to push it. Obviously, this little tiny car is not going to push it. And then he kept telling him, I'm going to get stuck. I'm going to get stuck. Sure enough, his bumper gets stuck underneath the school bus. And then he tells the guy, look, I got stuck. I couldn't do it. And the school bus driver, he's like, well, I'll help you get out, you know. And then he was asking him, well, how come you didn't talk to that truck driver? Flag him down. They're all like, what, you know, truck driver are you talking about? And now it starts playing this aspect of, okay, maybe is he crazy, right? And so as he's stuck, he's starting his car, and, you know, the bus driver, he's trying to shimmy it out. And all of a sudden, the truck is at the end of this tunnel, turns on his light, and slowly starts to come. And then that's when he freaks out. He's like, all right, come on, we gotta get this out. Gets the car out, and then backs out, and then he gets in the car and fucking takes off, right? Then he stops, because he sees that the truck comes around, flips a U, pushes the school bus, and starts it. Then he starts driving, right? And he's still on his journey to try to meet this account, you know? And when he gets there, that's when he stops at this railroad crossway, right? And the train's going by. Then the truck comes out right behind him and starts getting right behind him and starts nudging him to try to go right into the train. And then that's when he starts, you know, shifting back, getting forward, and then you're building anxiety on this, right? And then after that, you know, he basically says, all right, fuck this. And he finally, after the train is gone, he veers out, and then he, you know, hits an alcove, and then he's parked there, and then the truck takes off and is honking at him, right? So this whole movie ends up being a cat and mouse game, right? Then after that, he goes to another gas station, and then he sees this crazy lady, you know, at the side of the road in the middle of the desert. And he's like, yeah, can you fill her up? And this lady, she's kind of like kooky, crazy looking. She comes out, she goes, that's fine. Will you wait and use the phone? You could take a look at my snakes. She had snakes and fucking tarantulas and shit. You know, all these animals of the desert you could take a look at, right? So he goes to this payphone, which is oddly all fucking weird looking. It has barbed wire. Well, not barbed wire, but it has wire all around it and shit. And he gets in there, and then he starts calling, and he's not calling his wife. At this point, he's calling the police. And they're like, well, where the hell are you at? He's like, I don't know, because he's in the middle of the desert. And as he's calling, the truck comes right up, flips a U slowly, and then comes around, and then fucking tries to run his ass down as he's in the phone booth, but he jumps out. So the truck hits the phone booth, and then comes around, and then runs through all, like, the display glass cases of all these snakes and shit. Then the lady's coming out, my snakes! My snakes! Why the hell he do that, my snakes? I laugh at that just because I know the acting was kind of cheesy. But, I know I'm kind of fucked up on that. But anyways, you know, he gets up and everything, and then he sees that the truck is still circling around, like trying to egg him on. Then he jumps back in his car, and after she had told him that his radiator hose is bad, she doesn't fix it, so he starts taking off, right? As he takes off, the truck is, like, following right behind him, and that's when the suspense starts kicking in. You know? I shouldn't play music like that. It's more or less what Steven Spielberg wanted. He didn't want this film to have a lot of music, so he basically told the sound composer, hey, just do a bunch of sounds, make it creepy, right? And that's what this whole soundtrack was. It was all sounds and shit, right? So as he's driving, he's going up the hill and everything, his fucking radiator hoses blow out, right? And so the car is just, right? And that's when it starts building up, you know, anxiety. It has these slow camera shots of, like, Dennis Mann's face. He's like, come on, we gotta make it up that hill, come on. And he's trying to push his car, trying to start it, right? He's going up, then finally he hits the hill, and then he just, you know, shifts his car in neutral. The truck is coming on him, like, right on his ass, right? He goes down, and then as he's going down, he basically hits this alcove where it goes like the edge of a cliff, right? As he's going down, then all of a sudden he was just like, he basically was able to start the car at this point. He flips the car around, and, you know, here the car's all mangled and shit like this after, you know, this whole rough outing that it's been through. He basically flips the car over so it's faced with the truck, and the truck is coming on him head on, right? And so as the truck is coming on head on, he basically puts his suitcase on the gas pedal, and then he stays with the car all the way until it hits the truck. So the truck runs it down, it blows up, then you see the truck driver, well, you don't see the truck driver, you see his hands like he's freaking out, like, oh shit, you know, decompressing the brakes, trying to shift, and then all of a sudden goes right through the fucking cliff. And it does a slow, steady shot of, you know, this truck going down, right? And then you hear, like, the suspense music. And you hear all this wreckage sounds, right? And the best part of this film is that it doesn't fucking blow up the whole time. This was a Peterbilt truck, so it's one of those trucks that you see all the time on the freeway that carries, like, gas and shit like that. And on the back, it said flammable, right? You would think this fucking thing would blow up, but it didn't. So it showed that it went all the way down, and then you see David Mann just like, whoo, yes, all right, I survived. And that's the end of the movie. But what I loved about this film is that a lot of people forget that this film gave Steven Spielberg his foot in the door to do films, because what he did in this film was completely different from what other people would normally do. You know, and this is a TV-made movie, right? It was so big for the ABC Movie of the Week that they said, okay, we're going to release it overseas, but we want you to refilm a couple scenes, and then that way we'll fill this up so it gets to be 90 minutes. Because originally, I think it was like 70 minutes for this movie, right? So he filmed the extra scenes of, like, the diner scene, or when he was calling his wife. They added a couple of those scenes, which is why they use different cars. Well, it's the same car, but different year models, because they had to keep going back and doing reshoots, right? And what I love about this, too, is that Richard Matheson, the guy who wrote this story, he didn't believe that this could be turned into a movie, but Steven Spielberg worked his magic. And the way that Spielberg worked is that he got, you know, a big-ass butcher piece of paper and drew the whole freeway out and said, okay, well, we could plant cameras here, 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 and here, and we could do this shot, we could do that shot, and that's why he was able to shoot it so quick. But the problem was just editing process and how to get all that shit done, and we all know editing process takes some time, right? But he got it done and got it released. And what I thought what was great about it is that he, with all the sound input that he was putting in, it showed that when the truck was going down, you hear this metal whining sound, like, roar. That's not a metal whining sound, that's actually a T-Rex roar. I don't know why he put that in there, but he made this film seem like it was a David versus Goliath, kind of thing. And then that's why the character's name was David, which is pretty crazy. You know, there's a lot of interpretations of this film. And, you know, he put that in, and that's the same, that's the same T-Rex roar that he put in there for Jaws. After when the shark blows up and shit at the end, and then he's going down, you hear the T-Rex roar. That's the same sound. And what's crazy about this, you know, Spielberg, he learned a lot on this, but, you know, he did all this when he was 24, which blows my mind that, hey, you know, his first film was a horror film. His first, you know, directing jobs was all based in horror, you know, with Night Gallery and Kojak. And but I thought it was interesting. You know, I didn't know all that until I started researching this episode and watched the movie like 7 times this week. But what I loved about it, too, was just the story of itself, you know. I went back and actually did some research and actually read the original short story. And the short story was great, you know. But a lot of people, they forget about this film because, you know, everything now with horror films has to be all about blood, gore, and what kind of suspense. What can we do to push the envelope to make it scary, right? And Richard Matheson, you know, being the old school generation that he was, doing Twilight Zone and, you know, different short novels and stuff like that, he didn't come up with the idea of that. I thought it was interesting because I was watching the behind the scenes on the DVD, and they said that Richard Matheson came up with this idea, and he remembers it vividly. He wrote this whole story out because it all happened on the day that JFK was assassinated. He was playing golf with a friend. And after all that went down, they got in the car to go home. And when they were going home, a truck driver was fucking with them. And, you know, they almost veered him off the road. And he was like, oh, I got an idea for this. So he got a pen, wrote it on his buddy's mail, and then he wrote on the story. And he tried to sell it as a movie, but nobody wanted to buy it. So he's like, all right, fuck it. I'm going to put it in a magazine. And the only magazine that wanted to buy it was Playboy, which I thought was interesting because, you know, when you think of Playboy, you think of, like, you know, nude pictorials, all that shit. But no, they had short stories in there too. And, you know, that's how it got discovered. And, you know, the rest is history with it. But, you know, I thought it was interesting how they did so many different little winks to things like that. Especially with the fact that, you know, Steven Spielberg, he wanted noise instead of sound, you know. He did these wide-angle shots where it shows, you know, the camera right there in the mirror. Then you see this truck right there on the side. It was just, oh, so suspenseful. But because of this film being so good and, you know, great for what it was at the time, that eventually you knew there was going to be copycats, right? I think it was in 2000, no, going too far ahead. The first truck horror film that came out after this was Maximum Overdrive. Stephen King, he did his thing with it where, you know, electricity hits something and then all these trucks, they all come alive and shit. He did that one. And then later on, obviously, you had Joyride with Paul Walker, which was another good one. But, you know, I didn't like the aspect of how they made it kind of like Saw-ish a little bit, where he would fuck with him and then put him in a trap at the end. And, you know, this had nothing to do with any of that, right? This was just straight like, hey, you pissed off the wrong truck driver and they had nothing to do, so they were going to go and fuck with you. And back in those days, like I said, I've heard some stories. The crazy thing with it is that you always got to, you know, the moral of the story is, don't have road rage. And then also, too, you know, back in the day, truck drivers, they weren't as regulated as they are now. Now with truck drivers, they have all these, you know, trackers on them. They make sure that they drive 8 hours, and, you know, the maximum, you know, workload day. And they have to follow all these kinds of guidelines and rules, right? Well, back in the day, they weren't regulated as much, you know, especially in 1971, you know. And the way, if you watch this film and you see that truck, what it looked like, it was an oil tanker. What do they call it? They called it the Peterbilt. And I thought it was interesting because Steven Spielberg, he had his choice of like all these different trucks. He wanted the old school Peterbilt because he said it looked like a face, which was pretty cool. Which, you know, I never thought about it till I started seeing like the pictures when I was making the teasers for this episode. I was like, oh, okay, I see where you're going from there. But the aspect of they made it, I could see this story being put on like the Twilight Zone, and I wonder if, you know, Richard Matheson, he had this planned out where he was going to do it, like sell it as an idea for a TV show or something, but you know, things worked out for him though, because they turned it into a movie. And you know, it's one of those films, like I said, that people forget about, because when everyone thinks of Steven Spielberg's first film, they always run to Jaws. And they run to Jaws because it was released theatrically. It wasn't just straight to TV. Okay, it does good on TV. Now we're going to release it all over, right? This film wasn't like that. This film started in TV, got his name out there, and, you know, then they released it overseas, and that's what built up the buzz. And then, you know, later on he started to build up into Jaws, and then later on he did a lot of winks back to the film. You know, not only with the roar from the truck when it was going down, and then when the shark was, you know, blown up, but he used, there's a scene where, you know, David, he flags down these two old people in these old cars, and he's like, hey, I need help. Then there's a crazy lady who's just like, no, you need to go, something's got to happen. Ah. You know, he later on used that for Back to the Future. So, I mean, most of his films recently after that, I think all the way up until the 90s, he used a lot of winks back to that film because, you know, that's the film that really got his start out. But for me, I enjoy this film. I love this film because it builds the true aspect of horror. And what I mean by the true aspect of horror is because, you know, if you're driving home, or if you have to commute, or if you're going, like, on a vacation trip or something, you never know with these truck drivers. You really don't know. You know, whether you're in a SUV, a car, whatever, if you pass something up, you know, or if you piss off the wrong truck driver, you never know, you know? And especially during that time, you know, that's what made people, you would think people would drive safer after that, but no, they didn't. But I mean, it's one of those things that makes you think, like, okay, well, he's driving very aggressive. I don't want to go around him because I've seen that movie Duel. You know, and it's funny to think that, but this film was great, you know? And for me, what I guess, you know, what's funny, I was doing this research for it. Somebody had did a shot-for-shot remake of this, but they called it something else. And it was terrible. Oh my God, it was terrible. They didn't use the Plymouth Valiant, or they didn't use a Plymouth car or anything. They used a Mustang. It had to be, let's see, older than 2005 because it was a newer body style. But when I saw, like, parts of the trailer and everything, I was just like, no. And to my knowledge, would I like to see this film be remade? And my answer is no. Because this film was already great as it is, you know? You had the suspense, you had the anxiety, you had everything built up to it. The fact that they didn't show the truck driver's face was just blows my mind. You know, and that's what makes it even more creepy. It was playing on the whole aspect of Hitchcock's method of less is more. And if you do that, you'll have a very successful story and a horror movie, right? But, you know, thank you all for tuning in for this episode on Duel. If you've never seen this film, you know, please check it out. I know you can find it in a $5 bin at Walmart. I know that's how I found it. It's a true classic. It really is, you know. It's, for me, I love a lot of the original old, like, scary stuff, you know, horror movie stuff, like Twilight Zone, you know, that was TV show, but, you know, I like a lot of that old stuff that kind of tied into it, because before they got the whole, you know, blood and all that stuff in there with Texas Chainsaw and The Town That Dreaded Sundown, because those films really started it, but I like the whole aspect of how it built up the anxiety, because I believe, you know, new films, they don't build up the anxiety of that no more. They don't have the scare factor, like, okay, what's going to happen? Okay, is this car going to break down, like, right there, you know? But I love that aspect. So if you ever get a chance to, check out this film, Duel. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think, or if you've seen it, let me know what you guys think of this film, because to me, it's truly underrated for what it is, and it doesn't get enough credit as, you know, his other works like Jaws and all that, but it should be up there, you know, with Jaws, because, I mean, that builds up so much great suspense on this, you know? But anyways, thank you all for tuning in, and as always, I'll catch y'all next time, right?
Bow down to